Rob and Zsuzsanna, thank you very much for sitting down to chat with us today. As we know, the New South Wales Code of Conduct imposing new obligations on all parties with the short-term rentals ecosystem will be implemented on December 18th. We wanted to ask you a few questions to help break the code down. And let me kick it off with the first question, and to Rob, and then to you, Zsuzsanna. Can you provide a brief summary on the New South Wales Code of Conduct in few lines? What is it?
Okay, the New South Wales Code of Conduct is the system by which the government seeks to provide a means to professionalise our industry and to address the things that have been undermining us. In many ways, it's about the industry coming of age because we're creating professional standards. And I think for all the professional operators, it's very good news. It won't affect them. It does reinforce our obligations, whether you're an owner, a guest, or in fact, an operator or participant in some other way.
Zsuzsanna, anything to add to that?
The Code of Conduct is one aspect of the regulatory landscape that is coming into being in New South Wales. Apart from the Code of Conduct, there will be changes to the planning laws that will come into effect in June 2021, and compulsory mandatory registration. So the code, I always say it's like a tripod. It's one leg of the tripod, one of them. And it addresses the behavioral issues of managing short-term rental in residential properties.
If I could add something there, the code and the planning registration that'll come in next year were part of the major win that we had, which was that the New South Wales government went through an overall review of our industry, and the key wins were that short-term rental accommodation is now regarded by planning. It's officially a permissible use. It means that all the uncertainty for owners and operators has been removed, and this is kind of the back end of that. With the government giving us certainty, they also had to impose rules that made sure that we were responsible operators, and this is it. I guess, so we got permissible use. Yep. Secondly, a statewide framework rather than councils one by one setting their own things, and still offering the councils some flexibility for local controls. Okay,
thank you very much. And continue with the next question. Again, so kind of continue with you, Rob, on that one. How will it be enforced?
So the behavioural aspects will come under fair trading. Fair trading is the same authority that sits above the real estate and most other industries, whether you're a plumber or electrician, or if you're anything to do with consumer affairs. So they're very, very well equipped and experienced in managing these kind of issues. The Fair Trading Department will set up a commissioner who will be responsible for this in the same way there are commissioners for general real estate. And that commissioner will oversee the management of issues, complaints, and the way they're dealt with.
Thank you. Zsuzsanna, just to continue that, so how will the guests and hosts be tracked or verified?
The code says that there are industry participants, and there are 5 groups of industry participants. That's the portals, the digital portals, the hosts and the guests and the letting agents and the facilitators. All of them have set of obligations and rights. And for example, the portals, the digital portals, the listing portals have obligations not to accept a guest that is on the exclusion register, which is introducing the concept of exclusion register. So the fair trading, the New South Wales fair trading will say that the ultimate result of a breach of a code is that a guest or a host or a property will be excluded from participation. and that exclusion will be on a database, and that database will be public. So if you list the property as a host, or if you want to go to a place as a guest, it will be an obligation on the platforms to check whether you are on the exclusion register. And if you are on the exclusion register, that property cannot be listed or the guest cannot be accepted. So that one thing, that is what the code says. The second also, that if you are a letting agent managing a property on behalf of a host, then again, you can't deal with a property that is knowingly on the exclusion register. And I think this knowledge will be deemed. You are supposed to know, whether you know it or not, whether you will be supposed to know whether a property is on the exclusion register. And I think from a practical aspect, probably as a managing agent, we will need a declaration of the guests to say they are not on the exclusion register. So it kind of something in the correspondence to say that it's like when you do any return, that it's explicit to say the question should be that are you or any guests on the exclusion register. So it will be how it will happen practically, I don't know, but these are the obligations.
Thank you. Anything to add to that, Rob, from your end?
Yeah, I think so. I thought that was very good. Probably just in an overview sense, the reason for this code of conduct becoming mandatory is that we did have one for the last 10 years, which was voluntary. The problem was that when someone was, for those instances where someone was behaving irresponsibly, whether an owner or a guest, there was no measure of enforcement. So as you're aware, when someone stays in one of our properties as a guest, all of that is, they're not taking out a tenancy, they're staying there under a license to occupy. And that whole relationship is controlled by terms and conditions. So what the code is seeking to do is to cast in stone your obligations, whether you're an owner, a guest or whoever, to see that those are cast in stone in the form of terms and conditions, and that those terms and conditions are made clear. Whether you're a guest or whether you're an owner or a participant in some other way, it's mandatory that you firstly are fully aware of the terms and conditions or the code of conduct, that you make that you make a commitment to adhere to those terms and conditions, and that you also make sure that the guest is aware of what their obligations are, so that instead of things being hidden in the fine print, it's all up front. And basically, it's the same things that we're all aware of: noise, behaviour, making sure the properties is as it was advertised, making sure that as operators, that we're taking responsibility for the property and for its impact on neighbours. So I guess it's only about imposing the professional standards and making sure that there's clarity for all concerned.
Thank you. To continue some of the things that you touched, one of the key topic that we hear from our clients is around the insurance. And exactly kind of to understand, what do hosts need to get in terms of insurance?
The code says that it's an obligation on the host to have a public liability insurance, which includes the safety, looking after the guests. Okay, if in case there is on the premises something happened and there is personal injury or even death, then the property is covered for that. So that's an obligation. I think the mandatory part, most of the household insurance have public liability aspects, but I think this here specifically, from my point of view, the way I understand that the insurers need to be notified that the property is being used for short-term rental. Because if you have a tenant, let's say a residential long-term tenant, that's a different risk profile to guests coming and going, and some of them you don't have reference, you don't have personal knowledge. So I think that is extremely relevant that the policyholder notifies the insurer. So the insurer knows, because it's a material information, that this property is being used for short-term residential rental, and that has a public liability cover, let's say $10–20 million. Do you want to add to it, Robert?
Yeah, again, probably just to sort of make some analogies there and to provide the background. The insurance came up, it was raised by insurers in the parliamentary inquiry. And the reason why is there were a number of deaths in properties, and it became clear that there wasn't any responsibility for those deaths. And the insurance companies made it clear that if it's not specifically included in the property, it's not there. And the most awful way to find out that you don't have insurance is to find yourself in a situation like this. And I guess one example is if you're in a taxi, the car might be insured, the driver might be insured, but we have an obligation to make sure that the passenger is specifically insured. If you were to hire a car, if you have another driver, if you have passengers in your car, there's a third-party CTP insurance that makes sure third parties are covered specifically, apart from the comprehensive insurance or whatever. In the case of a car, if you were going to use that as a taxi or an Uber, that obviously that standard insurance isn't going to apply, because it might have a driver who is renting the car, or it might have other passengers in it. So the insurer, unless they're aware of that, the use is disclosed and the right kind of safeguards are in check, the insurer won't cover a normal car for that sort of use. And in the same way, with short-term rental use, you've got a property there, someone else is occupying that under license, the insurer needs to understand that that use is there. And secondly, there has to be a specific policy that protects those guests while they're on the property and any other visitors that are there. So really, all of us, and I include myself in this, because I've had a couple of experiences on this front. All the big name insurers, and nearly every owner has insurance of some kind. The problem is nearly every one of those policies won't cover a specific short-term rental accommodation use or the third-party guests unless they're specifically included in that policy and the use is notified. So really this is a call to say, if you are engaging in short-term rental accommodation and you're taking guests on, you have to firstly disclose the use to your insurer. You have to make sure you're covered, because if you find someone's hurt or even more unfortunately someone dies, this is a massive claim. And if you don't have protection, it will be catastrophic for everyone.
May I add something? This is just occurred to me, and I haven't discussed it with anyone, with Robert, but this will also bring up the issue of tenants who take out a long-term lease and use the property without the knowledge of the owner to short-term rental. I think that will also throw up insurance issues, because if they are not authorized representative of the host, then that will create possibly the scenario that the guests are not covered.
I'd like to again add to something. There's plenty of other specific landlord policies at the moment. Those policies primarily protect you from loss of rent, from someone not paying, or the contents on the property. Those do not cover, unless they specifically say they do not cover short-term rental accommodation. It's terribly important for anyone that operates in this industry. You know, you're not there when these guests are there. If something happens, you need to be protected. You, at the very first instance, contact your insurance company. Say, my property is being used for short-term rental accommodation. I have guests staying there. Does my policy cover this? And I'm afraid that for most of you, you'll find out that you may have thought you're covered, but believe me, unless the policy specifically states that you are, then you're not covered.
And just to clarify what's probably kind of the obvious, but it's every host. It's not a property management company gets insurance.
It has to be owner because, can I say, and again, this is becoming a little bit technical, the owner, the host is the owner of a property. You cannot, like, for example, you can't insure my house. There has to be a nexus between the ownership and the insured person. So nobody can insure the property on behalf of the owner.
Good.
Okay, so.
I think that there's another thing. I mean, I watched the Airbnb webinar yesterday, and they made the point that they think that they're covered, but they're not sure, and they're checking that. I think one example there was, I think they only have $1 million worth of cover. That goes nowhere in a personal injury claim. Also, the insurance, unfortunately, is defined by the fine print, and unless it generally provides for the standard use that you would expect, the more explicit it is, the less you're covered. It's terribly important that people get the right insurance.
Yes, indeed. I'm moving on to the next question. Is a lot of our clients are from the urban space, the urban rentals. And one of the things that came up is, what does the code of conduct mean to the future of urban rentals? And relate to that, that will be where there kind of any challenges of the relationship with strata companies. So urban and strata together in the light of the new code of conduct.
The mandatory aspect or the legal aspect of the code of conduct comes from the amendment of the Fair Trading Act 1987 that happened in August 2018. And one of the paragraphs, it says that if there is a strata scheme, then the strata owners, and they have to be, we're talking about only investment properties, the strata owners, if there is a 75% absolute majority, then they can decide to ban a strata scheme, but they can only ban something, a property that it is only used for strata, so it's not if it's primary residence. So that's number one, but that will probably be an extreme scenario. If you live in a strata property, or if you have a strata property, then of course the first thing is that you need to notify the strata committee that you are using or you're hosting in your premises, so they have to know. Then there is obviously, because of the proximity, because of the neighbor, because it's the density and such a intense living together, the management of the guests will be maybe more complex than in a self-standing house, because everyone can, because of the noise, because of rubbish disposal, the parking and everything else. Now, whatever is not covered, the items that are not included in the code, those items cannot be brought up as a valid complaint. So for example, if the parking is not mentioned in the code, then it cannot be a complaint as a breach. So what the code says, that if there is a strata, generally speaking, the protection of the neighbors, so you have to live or you have to conduct yourself to allow a peaceful enjoyment of someone else's property. So it means that it has to be, you can't do any damage willingly or unwillingly. You have to be mindful. You have to keep the house rules, the noise, and so on. So, but most importantly, there has to be a communication with the strata committee, and also people have to know, have to be able to contact you, and or yourself, the host or the host representatives.
going back to an overview situation, the strata situation is a touch point. And the reason is everything is amplified in a strata situation. All of us have been in an apartment, we've heard the neighbour upstairs, we've heard doors slamming. For common shared use facilities, if someone's drunk or behaving badly, it impacts everyone. And for our entire industry, this has been an issue, and sticking our heads in the sand and say it doesn't happen is the wrong way. What we have to do is address this. Now, most of the Guesty clients and most of the operators are professional operators who are very much aware of their responsibilities to neighbours. We live in communities. It's important that we respect our neighbours' rights as well. The purpose of the code is not to wholesale stop urban rental. What it's designed to do is make sure that owners and guests act responsibly, so that if you're managing urban rentals, I don't see this as in any way putting a horizon on your business. I see it as controlling the dodgy operators that are undermining all of us. And we're all aware of that there are some unscrupulous operators, that there are people who literally couldn't give a stuff, and that they're getting complaints and they're not dealing with it. Under the code, you have to be available to respond to problems. You have to let the other owners know that the property is being used for the purpose, and that how to get in touch with you. And there has to be emergency contacts for after hours as well. I can tell you that if you're talking about the limitation being the operators who are putting 6 people into a 32 square studio, that will stop. I mean, those people are simply abusing the privilege. And again, I've actually walked into a 35 square metre studio, and there is beds dropping out of the wall. There's, it's obviously the wrong use. This is going to mean that there has to be professional standards. Most of us are already doing it. It means we're obliged to do that, and that's mandatory. It also means that the purpose of the exclusion registers is to identify, address, and remove the dodgy operators and the dodgy guests. There is going to be more of a requirement on all operators to vet their guests and make sure that they're not there for the wrong purposes. For instance, if someone's booking your property on a Friday afternoon for one night, and it's in the same neighbourhood as where that guest comes from, you're being set up. We need to be vigilant. We need to address that. We need to shut it down. To my mind, this is only a good thing. We know that the urban short-term rental accommodation use is actually a growing phenomenon, and it's a good thing. It's because if you've got someone who's in hospital for extended medical treatment, they come down from the country, or you've got families wanting to visit their kids at school or uni, or just visit family and friends, hotels are largely unaffordable for families. They're also not where you want to be, because people who prefer to stay in short term want to be part and participate in the communities, whether that's in the beach or near the beach, or it could be anywhere else. I see that the short-term rental accommodation opportunities in urban areas is only going to increase, and it will be improved by the management of dodgy operators. I can tell you though that on the other side of that coin, the hotels are a tremendously aggressive and powerful lobby, primarily through Tourism Accommodation Australia, aka the Australian Hotels Association. There is a massive push on governments to shut down, control, and limit the accommodation, the short-term accommodation in urban areas. And that's part of the reason why there's a 180 night cap in Greater Sydney. It was only brought on as a very last minute change after a backbench revolt when the registration came in, or the laws were being made, and it will impact us. If we're not up to standard, we will be shut down. I think the best operators, as always, will rise and shine through this. The dodgy ones will be left behind.
Thank you. Registration. How will this process, or how is it going to look like? What does it entail once the register commences?
The New South Wales government, as Robert said at the very beginning, the New South Wales government has been dealing and actively, dynamically partaking in this whole process of regulation for 5 years. And they had the whole of government approach. The whole of government means that there is more than one department involved. The New South Wales Fair Trading, for example, is embedded within the Department of Customer Service. So that's the behavioral aspect, that's the code of conduct. The other aspect, the planning and the registration, the property registration, is with the Department of DPIE, which is the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. And that is developing this register. We have seen a very rudimentary presentation how it will look, but it will be part of New South Wales, what is called the Services New South Wales or sharing database. So what we haven't seen it in action, but it will be a property register. And I would like to emphasize again that there are two registries we're talking about. One is the exclusion register, which is coming through fair trading, which means that if you don't, I will use the word, if you don't deserve to be part of this short-term rental industry, then you will be excluded. That's a database run by the fair trading. And this registry is the same name, but it's a different registry, it's the property registry. And that is also coming from the amendment of Fair Trading Act, which said that you may have a registry. Now, this will say that anyone who is carrying on, or if you are a host and you give the right for someone to come to your property for short term, that property needs to be registered. We expect that will be obviously identification of the property, the premises, where it is, how big, tada. So basic information. But I think the most important aspect is that you can't advertise, you can't list, or you can't advertise anything, any of the properties without a registration number. So again, using analogy, it's like a car. You can't travel with a car without a license plate. So you will have, every property will have a unique identification, and that code, or that has to appear in every listing, whether it is through the booking platforms or it's a private website, so this is a cross-reference. That's what I would like. That's all I know about it.
The primary purpose of the registration is just like a taxi or anything else. If that property is going to be used for short-term rental accommodation, it has to be fit for purpose. So the purpose of the registration is to ensure, one, that the property is accurate in terms of its description and where it is, and to make sure that the planning, all residences are able to be used for short-term rental. But obviously, if this is a commercial property or it's somewhere else under different planning, it won't be allowed to be used. That's not going to be a problem for many people, but there are some that will fall foul of that. Primarily, the registration system is about making sure that properties are safe and compliant for the use. And that means registration will probably be built around not only verifying the address and the planning, but also ensuring a maximum number of guests, which will be an occasion, something that will probably be determined by the number of bedrooms and other habitable rooms. So you might find in a 2-bedroom apartment, as is currently the practice, it's 2 people per bedroom, and quite often the living room will be, for planning purposes, acceptable as a habitable space. So there will be the opportunity to have another couple of people there. You won't be able to have 16, 18 or 25 people staying in a house. You will also have to make sure that in terms of the safety and compliance, if you've got a swimming pool, it will have to be properly fenced. The balcony heights will have to be compliant. That doesn't mean they've all got to change. If your property was built in 1970, when there were shorter balcony heights, as long as you haven't made wholesale changes, that's fine too. If you've had a DA since, or if you've got a new property, it has to be safe and compliant. It'll probably include some other things such as circuit breakers on the power. It will include some mandatory provisions regarding smoke detectors. Originally, they had to be hardwired. I think we've succeeded in winning government support by saying, well, that's like saying you're only ever going to allow petrol-driven cars in days where electric cars are coming through. In order to be flexible, we have to allow for the 10-year lithium-sealed units. And I'm pretty sure we'll get those. In fact, they've got a lot of advantages anyway because they can be networked. Also in stratas in particular, and I know a lot of your clients are operating there, it's things like blind cords, making sure the windows don't open too far. I think ultimately other things such as CO2 measures and things like that will be included as well. But these are our responsibilities. It may sound onerous, but if your pool's not fenced, you shouldn't be having anyone there. Even if you do have insurance, if that pool's fence isn't there, you won't be covered. You'll be personally liable.
Yoav, may I add to this, because you viewers may think, especially people who are newcomers, may think there is a big or very high barrier of entry or continuation. But we feel, and I will say we, who've been in this process, that we achieved enormous lot, because short-term rental in residential properties is an exempt development. You don't need consent in all of New South Wales, except there are a few cases when there is a fire danger or a flood danger. But generally speaking, the New South Wales government said if you live in a dwelling, wherever dwelling is allowed, you can carry on short-term rental. That is an enormous achievement, because you probably know from your overseas experience how much there is this debate whether this is a commercial use or a private use. The fact that it is considered to be a private income, so it will not. You don't have to have an ABN. You don't need to have a GST registration. You can be in a residential zoning. All of this is an enormous hurdle that we overcome, and it's a big thing. The New South Wales government, if I say it really dramatically, the only thing they say, look, we allowed a lot of things, we agreed to a lot of things, but manage your guests, manage your hosts. All over the globe, governments are struggling also to have data. They want information. So that's behind the safety aspect and the licensing. They actually want to see how big it is, because they are planning. They plan for the future. They're planning infrastructure. They need to know.
And thanks for that. And the last question is more kind of regarding ASTRA. Is what are the services or resources that ASTRA is providing this community with to help them ensure compliance?
ASTRA is there to represent you and all other constituents. You don't have to be a member. We're still out there trying to ensure that your interests, your future, and your rights are protected. We're also seeking to professionalise the industry so that we're recognised as a true core sector of the accommodation industry in Australia. We can't do that unless we have the proper standards. We can't do that unless we address the dodgy operators that undermine all of us. It's only such a small percentage, but that's the stuff that gains traction with the media. That's the stuff that the politicians hear about. Because we're voluntary, we operate literally on a shoestring, and yet we sit on the government committees. I guess because we're very genuine, we're really focused on quality outcomes for the industry. We're not trying to hide anything, and government see us, I think, as a good operator, and someone with a really objective focus. So I guess in terms of the service we provide, number one, we provide advocacy. It's through us that we've won certainty for all of you. It's through us that we've won standards that will address the dodgy operators, and it's through us in future that our industry, which is now providing over 25% of the guest accommodation in New South Wales, will be recognised and respected ultimately as a core sector of the accommodation industry. With the hotel sectors and others really pitching massively against you, and in terms of weight, you know, they spent over $1.5 million just buying their corporate headquarters in Sydney, and they've got a staff, I think, of about 12 or 15, and their sole purpose is to lobby for the bigger overseas hotels against for all sorts of things, but their primary issue is to press for more controls on short-term rental accommodation, so that their industry can continue to thrive. And to us, that's a protectionist. It's already impacting us, and WA is a perfect example of that, where a whole inquiry has really been prosecuted by the big hotels. In terms of the services, and specifically in respect to the code, we have for the last 5 or 7 years had to put most of our energy into regulation and representation. In respect to the code in particular, we're developing a kit which members will have, and that will include such things as the standard letters you can send to all your landlords. It'll include details of the insurance and how you can access it, where it's available. It will also have management agreements. You will, and all of you need to be on proper, if you're representing a number of hosts, they need to be on management agency agreements. You've got to formalise the relationship, and this fair trading do that, whether you're a plumber or a builder or anything else. You have to have credentials, and you have to have a contract that recognises the parties and the service commitments between you. So we will be providing a master template for the agency agreements, and I think we'll be providing generic templates of terms and conditions that you can easily customise. In the short term, we'll make those available as draft templates. One of the things we have to do is to sort of monetize that to some way, so that ultimately we'd like to have a situation where if you've got a new client or something, you can just go online and pull down a pre-completed template that has your logo and those things, and not only as a means of generating some revenue for that, but ensuring that we can cover our costs. We'll be looking to put a basic charge on that. It might be $1.50 or $2 every time you sort of pull down a master template for terms and conditions or whatever. And so for that reason, we won't provide the kind of full depth of that in this initial kit. It'll mainly be the letters that you need to provide to your landlords just to tell them what's happening, the kind of letters that you need to send to your neighbours, the information that you need to make available to your guests, just a summary of those things. And I think beyond that, just a kind of checklist to make sure that you're doing everything right. And as time goes on, we'll expand that kit as well and formalise it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I think that we can testify on how knowledgeable, genuine, and care ASTRA is about the local short-term rental industry. We said it a few times that you make us better in this industry. So, and even kind of this opportunity to speak with you and to pass our clients' question, that's a great assistance. And I think that we had a very informative and insightful chat here today. And thank you very much for that. And I'm sure that kind of there probably will be more question, more kind of information that our client will need. So now that our viewer know kind of the face and the leaders of ASTRA, as well as kind of we are here to assist with anything. So we encourage just to be in touch, and we will provide the right assistance.
Thank you for that. And as always, it's a pleasure to be sort of sitting with you. Every time we do, it's refreshing, and your passion comes across. Of course, it's not just us. People like you are making a difference as well. And I guess one of the things we're most excited about in the coming calendar year is the first genuinely national conference for our industry. And for those who don't know, UE is actually sitting on our peak committee group that's doing the organising. And that's mainly because we want him to do most of the work. But apart from that, it's always a delight to work with you, Yui, and I can't wait for us to extend our regulatory services into providing wonderful conferences where we can go and learn, interact, have workshops, and together make this the worthy quality industry that we're all working so hard to do. So thank you for today.
Well, thank you for your kind words. And, I think that 2021 already looks better. So
yes,
something to look for 2021. Thank you, Zsuzsanna. Thank you, Rob. It's been an absolute pleasure.